Before we begin, thank you so much for being here and supporting the channel. Every like, every share, and every subscription truly means a lot to me. Your support is a huge source of encouragement, and it helps me keep bringing more stories like this to you. So if you enjoy this kind of story, please subscribe, like, and share. Now let's begin. The first sign was not dramatic. It was a child asleep on a folding bench under a transit lamp that had been left on too long. Tessa Ward noticed the girl because everyone else was looking at the towers. At the far edge of Astor Vale, 3 silver-gray pressure towers stood above the unfinished housing rings like clean promises. Camera drones drifted around them, and Galaxy Council banners floated in the air lanes. Cargo tugs moved slowly over the eastern docks, bringing food printers, medical pallets, and the last sealed banks of water filters for the opening ceremony the next day. Below that polished skyline, families from Earth waited in long temporary corridors made of modular walls and rental heaters. Some had already been on Orion Gate for months, and some had been moved twice by war and then again by the collapse of old freight routes. The child on the bench held a plastic transit token in one hand while her mother argued at a distribution desk. The family had just been moved again for the 4th time in 11 days. Tessa stood in the middle of that noise in a dark work jacket with Earth Reconstruction Directorate stitched across the chest. She was 39, broad-shouldered, steady, and tired in the practice way of people who had spent too many years making emergency housing look temporary when everyone knew it would become permanent. She had come to Astor Vale to sign the final technical clearance for District 9. If she signed, 10,000 people would begin moving in within 72 hours. And if she delayed, half the station would blame Earth for whatever came apart next. Astor Vale had been sold to the Galaxy as proof that the post-war order still worked. It sat on Orion Gate, one of the busiest trade crossings in that region of council space, where freight lanes from mineral belts, inner worlds, and colonial routes met under the same customs canopy. The city had been built for maintenance crews, dock teams, cargo technicians, medics, and the families who followed those jobs. On paper, it belonged to everyone, but in practice, it had been shaped by committees dominated by the 3 oldest voting blocks inside the Galaxy Council. Tessa crossed the temporary corridor and stepped into a service tram with Mina Soul and Dr. Elias Reese. Mina, her youngest systems engineer, moved like she expected hidden mistakes to fall out of the walls at any moment, while Elias looked gentle until he spoke. District 9 intake numbers changed again, Mina said, as the tram doors closed. They added 400 dependents and moved up the first night shift families. Who approved that? Tessa asked. Mina checked the pad in her hand. Director Vay's office. Elias let out a flat breath. That puts more children into the first respiratory cycle than planned. They should still be inside the safety band, Tessa said. She did not sound convinced, and all 3 of them knew it. The tram rolled out over a maintenance line above the lower utility trench. From there, the towers looked too clean, and Tessa had spent too many years in civil systems to trust anything that looked perfect the day before opening. Real infrastructure showed strain lines, dust, scuffs, patched access plates, and human fingerprints. These towers looked like a render someone had forced into reality. At Tower 2, Tessa stepped into the service core and felt the first wrongness in her bones before she saw it on a display. Environmental systems had a rhythm, and so did human lungs, sleep cycles, and closed habitat pressure. When those rhythms matched, people barely noticed the room around them. When they matched badly, trained people felt it before the instruments fully told the story. "Hold the feed," she said. Mina froze the live display while Tessa walked to the wall console and pulled up the latest pressure sequence. The numbers came in calm, orderly lines: baseline pressure, oxygen swing, moisture cycle, particulate scrub, and vibration tolerance. Astor Vale had been built for multiple species, so every setting lived inside a negotiated band. Tessa stared at the active values and felt her face go cold. "This is not our final table," she said. Mina looked again. "No." Elias stepped closer. "How far off?" Tessa opened the old Earth recommendation beside the live system values. The difference did not scream, and that was what made it dangerous. There was no red warning and no lethal spike. There was only a careful shift downward in support for the zones, meant mostly for human families and human labor housing. The moisture curve was lower. The oxygen recovery after work cycles was flatter. The particulate scrub intervals stretched just enough to save cost, and the vibration limit widened by small amounts that would not matter much to the 3 council species the standard had really been built around. For humans, those same small changes would matter. They would hit lungs, sleep, concentration, and long-term neurological strain. Elias lowered his voice. This will not kill them on day 1. No, Tessa said. Mina looked from one to the other. Then what does it do? Tessa did not answer right away. She had learned years ago that the most dangerous harm was often the kind that gave bureaucracies room to keep smiling. It makes them endure, Elias said for her. It makes them tired, then less sharp, then less well. Headaches, bad sleep, shallow oxygen recovery, slow inflammation, weak recovery after work. Children will handle it badly, and older workers will break down faster. He paused, then looked at the screen again. The system can still call all of that acceptable if no one collapses in front of the camera. Tessa scrolled deeper into the authorization trail. Most of it had been scrubbed, but not well enough. A late sequence revision had been pushed through under a council override. She followed the chain and saw approval codes linked to the project standards office, Director Halden Vey's administration layer, and a compliance seal from Leorison, the Galactic Council standards official at Astorvale. Mina swore softly. Export everything we can still touch, Tessa said. Mina moved at once. 2 seconds later, the system locked them out. A gray notice. Replace the data window. Access restricted under opening phase integrity protocol. Mina stared at it. They sealed it. They knew someone would notice, Elias said. Tessa turned away from the screen. Call Vey. Leorison was already in the room when they arrived. She represented the Council Standards Authority at Astorvale, and everything about her seemed built to remove friction from ugly choices. Her tone was calm, her clothes plain, and her language always measured. She believed in systems the way some people believed in religion, and that was part of why Tessa distrusted her more than louder enemies. Tessa placed her pad on Vey's table and projected the divergence map. You changed the pressure and support curves in the human housing bands. You cut recovery time, widened vibration tolerance, and pushed human habitats down to the edge of a legal band we never approved. They glanced at the projection, then at Leora, then back at Tessa. Astorvale is a multi-species city. I know what city we built. We adjusted the final balance to meet unified occupancy requirements. You adjusted it to meet cost, schedule, and optics. Leora folded her hands. Engineer Ward, the final profile remains within Council-certified limits. Safe for whom? Tessa asked. For shared occupancy across the declared demographic mix. Tessa held her gaze while Leora continued. No city of this scale can be tuned to one physiology without imposing a cost on others. These are negotiated environments, and every major member species accepts some degree of imperfect fit. Elias spoke before Tessa could. Human bodies are not being asked to accept imperfect fit. They're being asked to absorb slow damage. They lean back. Dr. Reese, that language is inflammatory. It is clinical. It is selective. Tessa ignored them both. You did this after Earth filed its final assessment. Earth filed a position, Leora said. The Council certified a standard. You buried the difference. The difference was reviewed. Tessa had heard versions of that sentence for years. It always meant the same thing. People with less risk had made a decision about people with more risk, then hidden the gap. Inside procedure. She pressed harder. District 9 opens first. Mostly human intake, families, dock crews, maintenance labor. You know exactly who will live there first. Do not talk about this like it is abstract. Vey's face cooled. And do not pretend delay has no victims. There are families sleeping in transit spillover, supply teams rotating through emergency bunks, and agreements tied to opening. If we stop now, we crash the handoff and destabilize the gate recovery plan. Then stop calling it recovery, Tessa said. Call it what it is. A cheaper system that spins human bodies slowly. Silence sat in the room for a moment. They stood. You are tired, Engineer Ward. Everyone is tired. That does not give you the right to frame a balanced standard as abuse. Balanced by whose body? Leora spoke more softly than before. I understand the emotional appeal of your objection. Tessa almost laughed. Leora went on. But systems do not survive on emotion. They survive on agreed limits. Humanity has been classified as a high-resilience population in mixed infrastructure environments because your species can keep functioning across a wider band than most. Elias muttered, "There it is." Tessa felt something settle inside her. Not anger yet, but its colder cousin. Say that again. Leora did not blink. Humanity can continue to function across a wider band than most. Function, Tessa repeated. That is the word you chose. It is the correct word. No, Tessa said. It is the useful word. They stepped in. Enough. Opening proceeds tomorrow. If Earth wishes to file a formal objection, it may do so through the post-occupancy review process. Tessa stared at him. Post-occupancy. That is the procedure. Once people move in, the file closes. The opening phase closes, yes. Then the damage becomes background noise. Vay's patience snapped for the first time. The galaxy cannot rebuild from war if every engineering objection becomes a moral veto. You are here to finish a city, not hold it hostage. Tessa picked up her pad. You already held it hostage. You just charged the rent to us. She left before he could answer. Outside, the concourse was being polished for the opening ceremony. Lighting crews adjusted panels, so human skin, Varan skin, and Kel grain pattern would all read well under the same broadcast spectrum. Children ran between stacked cargo sleeves while a vendor from Earth sold hot flatbread beside a kiosk renting formal wear for the ceremony. Tessa watched a human family point up at the towers with relief on their faces. Mina came up beside her. What now? What is the official emergency freeze threshold if tower integrity is compromised before opening? Mina looked at her sharply. Tessa, answer. Mina Svalovid. If the primary pressure spines are made unstable, the entire city goes into forced review. In the opening, cancel. Elias had followed them out. Do not do this because you are angry. Tessa turned on him. I am not angry. He studied her face and believed her. They made it worse. Back in the Earth Project office, Tessa filed a final internal objection. She requested an immediate suspension of opening, an independent biological review, and emergency intervention from Earth Reconstruction Command. She attached every fragment Mina had saved and flagged the risk to child respiratory development and worker cognitive decline. She did everything the lawful way one last time. The response came back in under 14 minutes. No one had even bothered to pretend they had read the medical annex. Request denied pending council compatibility review. Opening sequence protected under interblock reconstruction treaty. Further interference may expose Earth to financial and diplomatic penalties. Mina read it over Tessa's shoulder. They want us boxed until tomorrow. Yes. Elias stood at the door, jaw tight. If the opening happens, how long before symptoms show in a measurable way? In some workers, weeks, he said. In enough people to force a political fight, months. In enough children to make everyone sick with shame, years. Tessa looked through the office glass at the towers. She imagined District 9 filling with human families, night shift workers trying to sleep through bad air, children learning to breathe shallow without knowing why, and mothers blaming headaches on stress while supervisors marked down slower reactions as personal weakness. Hospitals would process the damage as individual failure, while council reports counted people as sheltered, employed, and stable. The city would look like success while the bodies inside it quietly paid the price. No, she said. Mina knew before Elias did. Tessa, the towers can be dropped in a controlled sequence. That is sabotage. It is structural arrest under emergency ethics. It will be called sabotage by everyone who matters. Then let them say it clearly, Tessa said. Elias stepped closer. If you do this, there is no halfway back. They will come for you first, and Earth may let them. I know. Mina asked the harder question. Can you guarantee no deaths? No guarantee, Tessa said. Only design. If we trigger at low occupancy, clear the service ring, and cut the spines in sequence, the towers will fold inward and freeze the backbone. It will be ugly and expensive, but it will not be a mass casualty event. Elias stared at her for a long moment. I hate that this is the cleanest option left. It is not clean, Tessa said. It is just the last one. A quiet passed between them, while each understood what standing with her meant. Then Mina nodded once. Tell me where. Before dawn, while Astor Vale still wore its ceremonial lights, and before the opening crews finished their first rotation, Tessa led a 3-person team through maintenance shafts beneath the east pressure spine. She moved through a city she had helped build with perfect familiarity, and that was part of the cruelty. She knew where the support ratios would surrender. She knew how to make the towers fail without turning the city into a grave because she had done her job well. At 6 minutes before broadcast rehearsal, she sent the evacuation code to the service ring using an emergency structural marker no one outside engineering would question until it was too late. At 4 minutes, she armed the spine cuts. At 2 minutes, Mina whispered, "Last chance." Tessa watched the pressure graph flatten and thought of the girl on the bench. Do it. Tower 1 folded first, not in an explosion, but in a deep, terrible groan as internal. Support columns unlocked in the exact order Tessa had once written for wartime evacuation collapse scenarios. Tower 2 bent seconds later, then Tower 3. The upper shell sank, broke inward, and dropped into the maintenance field in a spray of inert panel fragments. Sirens flooded the air, transit lines halted, and cargo traffic froze. Across Astor Vale, the light shifted from ceremonial gold to emergency white. The city did not die. It simply stopped pretending. By the time security teams reached the shaft, the opening had been thrown into mandatory review. The pressure backbone was disabled, and the most expensive reconstruction project on Orion Gate had become a crime scene. Tessa did not run. When they found her, she was still standing in the service tunnel with a control slate in her hand. Director Halden Vey arrived red-faced and breathless in a hardshell transit suit he had probably never expected to use. Security, project staff, and camera drones crowded behind him. "What have you done?" he shouted. Tessa looked at him with a steadiness that chilled Mina more than any scream would have. "I stopped you from opening it." By midday, half the galaxy had seen the footage. The first version of the story spread faster because it was simpler. Earth reconstruction engineer destroys flagship post-war city on eve of opening. The people waiting for homes did not need help deciding how to feel. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the Earth Project office, angry, exhausted, and ready to put a face on what had just been taken from them. Tessa watched them from behind armored glass. She knew some of the faces: welders, tunnel crews, filter technicians, 2 women who had spent 6 months patching reclamation lines after a coolant rupture, and a man whose wife had died during the freight blockades and who had brought his sons here because this city was supposed to be the first stable thing they had known in years. Jonas Pike stood on a crate at the center of them. He was not elegant, and that was part of why people trusted him. He was broad across the chest, rough-voiced, gray in the beard, and carried an old injury in his left knee. He had led dock labor teams during the war and later helped negotiate worker placement after the ceasefires. He pointed toward the office tower. "Come out. If you're going to wreck 10,000 beds, you can at least look at the people you dumped back into transit." Mina swore from across the room. Security should clear them. Tessa shook her head. That would make it worse. It already is worse. Elias stood with his medical pad open, reviewing the first reports from the temporary climate zones. Some of the older people were already having trouble in the live test modules. Headaches, breath strain, poor sleep. Nothing dramatic, exactly the kind of thing they would hide. "Can you prove it yet?" Mina asked. "Not to a tribunal. Not to a council panel. Not in one day." Outside, Jonas shouted again. "Ward." Tessa buttoned her jacket and headed for the door. Mina moved to block her. "No. Yes. They want a face to punish. They already have one. She stepped outside into hard white floodlights and station air that always smelled faintly of metal, cleaning fluid, old heat, and distant fuel. The crowd noise sharpened at once. Some cursed her, and some only stared. A child asked loudly if she was the woman who broke the city, and his father told him to be quiet, though not with much conviction. Jonas climbed down from the crate and came forward until only 3 security officers stood between them. You took homes from people who had nothing left. Tessa met his eyes. I stopped a bad city from opening. You stopped our city from opening. It was not built safe for us. A bitter laugh moved through the crowd. Present suffering always sounded louder than future injury. Tessa kept her voice low, so they had to quiet to hear. District 9 was tuned under a standard that would have made human residents sick over time. Over time, Jonas repeated. That is what you have. Over time. Yes. He stepped closer. Then you should have proved it before you dropped 3 towers. I tried. To whom? To the people who changed the standard. That bought her a second of silence. Nothing more. Jonas pointed at the transit dorms behind him. The families sleeping back there do not care about your paperwork. They care that you chose for them. You put them back in line and called it protection. Tessa looked past him at the crowd and knew he was right in the only way that mattered tonight. Their exhaustion had faces and names, while her evidence was still trapped behind locks and seals. I know what I took from you, she said. Do you? A woman shouted. Tessa turned toward the voice. It came from a mechanic she recognized from the filtration teams. The woman held a toddler on one hip and spoke with a flatness sharper than rage. My daughter was supposed to sleep in a room tonight. For a moment, Tessa had no answer that did not sound like theft. Jonas saw the pause and mistook it for defeat. You want us to trust you? Show us something. Show us more than fear and broken concrete. I will, Tessa said. As soon as they stopped trying to bury it. A few people laughed again, sharp and hopeless. Jonas shook his head. You had better pray you are right, Engineer Ward. Because if you're not, you did not just ruin a project. You taught every power on this gate that human housing could be delayed and blamed on us again. That hit harder than Vay's accusations had. Tessa knew the history too well. Temporary solutions became policy the moment human desperation made them useful. Jonas turned away and the crowd followed, not satisfied and not calmed, simply too tired to spend more on her that night. When Tessa stepped back inside, Mina was waiting with both anger and pity on her face. That helped no one. It told me what comes next. What comes next is they take everything before dawn. They were both right. At 0230 station time, Council Security and Astorvale Administration sealed the Earth Project Office under opening phase investigation protocol. Every local server was mirrored, every terminal locked, and Tessa's engineering credentials were suspended pending review. 2 armed officers stayed outside the door after that, polite and immovable. The order came with a personal notice from Halden Vay. Pending inquiry, you are relieved of all active authority on site. The words were so bloodless that Mina nearly threw the pad at the wall. Elias did. Not even look up. Did they seize the medical annex? Everything signed under the project chain, Mina said. Tessa sat in a hard chair and forced herself to think forward. Panic was a luxury for people who still had options. What remains off-chain? She asked. Mina rubbed her face. A service mirror in the old environmental simulation lab. It was never folded into the final governance stack because the council said it was redundant. Tessa looked at Elias. Can you get into the old lab? He nodded slowly. If the maintenance corridor still answers to pre-opening codes. Mina understood before he finished. You want to go tonight? Before they realized what they forgot. The environmental simulation lab sat beneath one of the unfinished education blocks, far from the ceremonial center and almost too ordinary to attract notice. It had been built early, when Earth still believed Astorvale would accept species-specific medical modeling as part of final approval. The council had called that inefficient and cut the lab down to a secondary role. That insult might now save them. They moved through service passages used by cleaners and power technicians, Mina opening old locks with a skill she refused to explain. The lab smelled of stale filters and disuse. Dust sat on the edges of the console islands, and a row of human calibration harnesses still hung where Earth's staff had left them months earlier. Mina brought the systems up one cluster at a time. "Come on," she whispered, as if coaxing an animal. One panel flickered, then another. Then they found it. A mirrored packet of live environmental tables from District 9 had been cached in the lab during earlier tests. Not everything, but enough. Tessa leaned over the console while Mina sorted the data, and Elias began tagging medical consequences in quick bursts. The story came out in layers, and this time it was plain enough that nobody in the room could hide behind jargon. Pressure had been lowered just enough to favor the dominant council physiologies. Moisture curves had been tightened to protect imported infrastructure surfaces and reduce microbial growth in shared ducts. But over time, that same change would dry. Human airways. Oxygen recovery after labor shifts had been flattened because full human rebound was judged unnecessary in what one note called high-resilience populations. Particulate scrub cycles have been lengthened to save energy and filter replacement. Even the floor vibration tolerance in worker housing have been widened because humans, according to one attached planning note, retain task performance across a broader sensory noise band. Not thrive, not sleep well, not stay healthy. Retain task performance. Elias stood very still as he read. "Tessa, this is not negligence." She already knew. The attached notes were worse than the raw settings because they broke the lie of compromise. Planning teams had modeled 3 full operating standards for mixed occupancy. 1 protected human recovery without seriously harming anyone else, but it cost more in modular adjustment and energy use. 1 sat in the middle. The one they chose was the cheapest. The harms to humans were not hidden. They had been sorted under worker decline, medical drift, and long-term compensation exposure. Someone had calculated how long a worker could keep functioning before the damage became expensive enough to matter. Mina read over her shoulder and went pale. "They priced us." "Yes," Tessa said. "They actually priced the damage." Elias pointed at another line. "Look at the reimbursement assumptions. They pushed chronic respiratory harm and neurofatigue into worker health pools instead of habitat responsibility. They turned infrastructure injury into personal medical burden." That was the moment the idea changed shape in Tessa's mind. Until then, Astorvale had still been a cruel city. After that line, it became part of a machine. The city was not one mistake. It was one profitable form of a standard built to spend human resilience. Mina dumped the data into 3 separate storage slates. "We need to get this to Earth. We need to keep it alive long enough to matter," Tessa said. They made it back to the office before shift change, though not before surveillance picked up their movement in an outer corridor. By morning, Haldenvey was on every major feed in Astorvale's central media. Hall, giving the performance of a man saddened by someone else's instability. "We are cooperating fully with all reviews," he told the cameras. At this time, there is no evidence that the city's certified environmental profile posed immediate danger to lawful occupants. Engineer Ward acted outside authorized process and caused vast disruption to vulnerable families who deserved safety, not ideology. He never raised his voice. That made him more convincing to people who wanted calm more than truth. Leora's son followed with the council line. The Galactic Council recognizes that post-war conditions create emotional pressure on reconstruction teams. But safety governance cannot depend on unilateral personal intervention. Standardization exists so that one actor's fear cannot destabilize systems serving many populations. Fear. There was the frame. Make the human woman emotional and the system rational, and the cheapest cruelty became order. By noon, Earth headquarters sent a narrow statement. Earth does not condone unauthorized damage to shared infrastructure. Earth also insists on full review of all health and certification data relevant to Astorvale. Mina read it aloud in disgust. "That is not support." "No," Tessa said. "It is breathing room." "For whom?" "For whoever decides whether to save me or cut me loose." The answer began arriving that same day in the form of Adrian Holt. He stepped into the Earth office with a travel case, a legal badge, and the expression of a man who had gone too long without sleep and no longer expected good surprises. He was in his mid-40s, lean, severe, and careful with words. He represented Earth in inter-block liability disputes, which meant he usually arrived after everyone else had already failed. He set his case on the table and looked at Tessa for a long moment. I came to keep this from becoming a species-level disaster. Good afternoon to you too, Mina muttered. Adrian ignored her. Engineer Ward, if you cannot prove you exhausted lawful remedies before destroying those towers, Earth will classify your action as personal misconduct. If we do not do that, the Council will try to attach your decision to our reconstruction authority and use it to strip Earth of standing across multiple projects. Then help me prove it, Tessa said. If the proof exists, I will. That was not faith. It was a transaction, and Tessa respected him more for it. They spent the next 6 hours building a chain. Every memo, every denial, every blocked request, every standards conflict, every medical note, every saved mirror file from the simulation lab. Adrian was ruthless about what mattered and colder still about what did not. Intent, he said at one point, circling a marker on the wall display. You must show they knew the human costs and chose them anyway. We can show that, Elias said. Not just medically, Adrian replied. Structurally, politically, financially. If all you have is harm, they will say complex systems always carry trade-offs. If you show chosen harm because it was cheaper and easier to impose on humans, then you have something a chamber cannot bury without staining itself. By a second cycle, the pressure on Earth sharpened. Insurers threatened claims. Shipping coordinators warned of delays, and rival delegations hinted that if Earth defended Tessa too hard, other stalled human housing packages might quietly lose priority. That was how big systems punish dissent. Not always with open force, often with administrative weather. Jonas Pike returned in the middle of that storm. This time he came without the crowd. Security almost turned him away, but Tessa told them to let him in. He stood in the doorway with the same hard face, though the anger in it had changed shape. Behind him waited a young dock worker Tessa had seen once during a site orientation and an older woman from intake services. Jonas did not sit. I brought people from the trial modules. Elias straightened at once. The young dock worker spoke first. He had spent 12 days in a live occupancy band during pre-opening systems load, and at first the symptoms had seemed small: bad sleep, dry throat, pressure behind the eyes, slower reaction during crane simulation. He thought it was only stress until the move back to older housing eased the worst of it within 2 days. The older woman had run overnight childcare in a temporary family block tied to the same ventilation backbone. She described children waking with nosebleeds, shallow breathing, and headaches their parents blamed on moving strain. Jonas folded his arms while Elias took notes. You could have led with this yesterday, Tessa said. I had stories yesterday, Jonas replied. Now I have a pattern. What changed? He hesitated, and Tessa saw how hard honesty was for a man whose authority rested on certainty. My people started comparing symptoms after the move back. Too many matches, same sleep problems, same headaches, same feeling like your chest never fully opened on the inhale. I still think you should have found another way. So do I. That surprised him. Tessa went on. Wanting another way did not make one appear. Jonas looked at her for a long moment. If this is real, they will say we are being used. They already say that. Then do not waste it. You put a data chip on the table. Worker reports, shift logs, housing assignments. Use what matters. When he left, Adrian picked up the chip and nodded once. Good. Public anger is one thing. Public anger turning into witnesses is another. Mina leaned back in her chair. So what now? Adrian answered by turning his console toward them. A priority council summons had just arrived. Engineer Tessa Ward was ordered to appear before Sino's chamber under interblock authority to answer for catastrophic, unauthorized interference with protected reconstruction infrastructure. There it was. Not a city review and not a local inquiry. A chamber. The hearing would be held at the council's deliberation complex on the inner ring of Orion Gate, in a room designed to make individuals look temporary and systems look immortal. Mina read over Adrian's shoulder. They're moving fast. They want the frame set before the evidence spreads, he said. Tessa took the summons and read it twice. The words were clean, formal, and utterly predatory. She was being invited into a place built to decide what kind of person she had been all along. By the time the transport departed for the inner ring, the galaxy already thought it knew. Sino's chamber would now decide whether Tessa was the criminal in the story or only the person who forced everyone else to stop lying. Sino's chamber was not beautiful. It was too expensive for beauty to matter. Tessa entered under escort with Adrian Holt on one side and 2 council officers behind. She wore a plain dark suit, with only a small Earth reconstruction pin at the collar. She had chosen not to dress like a defendant and not to dress like a martyr either. The presiding official was a council adjudicator named Marintal, an older woman from one of the neutral outer blocks, known for being fair as long as fairness cost nothing. Beside her sat 2 rotating assessors for infrastructure and civic liability. Adrian leaned close before the session opened. Do not chase every insult. Make them define their choices in their own language. Tessa nodded. The hearing began the way such hearings always did, with procedure dressed as dignity. Charges were summarized, the tower collapse timeline reviewed, and the opening delay converted into damage estimates and disrupted occupancy numbers. Astor Vale was described as a protected reconstruction project vital to regional stabilization. The phrase appeared 3 times in the opening minutes because institutions love language that made any challenge sound like sabotage against peace. Then Haldenvey spoke. He did not point or sneer. He did something worse. He sounded regretful. Engineer Ward was entrusted with extraordinary latitude due to Earth's expertise in post-conflict reconstruction, he said. No one disputes her talent or years of service. But talent without governance becomes hazard. Our records show she raised late objections based on non-standard projections, was informed those concerns had been reviewed through council process, and then, rather than continue lawful review, chose to disable core infrastructure supporting a vulnerable civilian population. A display came alive behind him, displaced families in temporary corridors, children asleep on baggage, workers eating from distribution packets on the floor. These are not abstractions, Vey said softly. These are people who paid for one person's certainty. Tessa felt the room tilt toward him. He knew exactly what he was doing. Start with visible suffering, then force everyone else to sound technical afterward. Sarah Dawn followed for the insurers. The financial cost is severe. More concerning is the precedent. If certified systems can be destroyed whenever a local engineer personally disputes the balancing of multi-species tolerances, no reconstruction program in council space can operate securely. There was again personal, local dispute. Make her smaller and the system larger. Leora Sun spoke last in the opening block. The Galaxy Council recognizes species-specific concerns. But standardized environments exist because no shared city can be built around every physiology at maximum preference. Humanity has historically shown broad operational resilience in mixed infrastructure zones. The final Astor Vale profile fell within legal limits after review. Engineer Ward rejected that review and replaced governance with unilateral force. Adrian rose only after they had fully built the frame. Council for Earth does not dispute that Engineer Ward acted outside authorized process. We do dispute the suggestion that authorized process remained meaningful after critical facts about human biological harm were concealed, discounted, or translated into harmless-sounding administrative language. He did not push harder yet. He only opened the door. That first session was built to leave Tessa cornered. Marintal questioned her in a way meant to force a choice between arrogance and remorse. Engineer Ward, did you order the controlled collapse of 3 pressure towers essential to Astor Vale's operation? Yes. Did you have legal authority to do so? No. A stir moved through the upper tiers. Truth sounded different when offered without disguise. Then on what basis did you act? Tal asked. Emergency ethics. Preventive intervention against a city I believed unsafe for the population it was about to receive. Believed, Tal repeated. Not proved. Tessa held her gaze. I proved it to the standard available to me before access was cut off. Tal çektaslat. You raised objections less than 1 day before opening. I raised formal objections less than 1 day before opening. The concern began earlier. How much earlier? Weeks in modeling, days in pattern analysis, hours in confirmation. Tal sat back. And still you did not secure an injunction, independent freeze, or external review before you destroyed infrastructure. No. Why? Because none of it would have arrived in time. Once the city opened, the file would close. Liorasin insefted vursali smotlu. That is inaccurate. Post-occupancy review exists precisely for emerging concerns. Tessa turned toward her. Post-occupancy review exists to normalize them. Noise rippled through the chamber. Tal called for order. They came after Tessa for hours, but the questions all aimed at the same target. Make her sound selfish, narrow, rash, or emotional. Why had she not trusted multi-species calibration? Why had she not sought Earth Command intervention earlier? Why should one species be allowed a special veto over shared standards? Did she accept responsibility for increased hardship across temporary housing sectors? She answered as steadily as she could. Yes, she knew the hardship she had caused. Yes, she accepted that cost. No, slow damage did not stop being damage because committees approved it. No, resilience was not consent. No, a species did not owe its body to the convenience of a system that refused to pay what safety cost. They recessed after second cycle with little visible movement in the room. In a private consultation chamber, Adrian finally allowed himself to speak plainly. You did well. It did not feel like well. That is because they built the room to turn conviction into embarrassment. Mina entered through a side seal before Tessa could reply. She looked exhausted and triumphant in equal measure. You were right to worry. They tried to lock down the last consortium archives after the summons went public, but they were slow. Adrian stood. What do you have? Mina put a storage wafer on the table. Not enough to destroy them on its own. Enough to change the argument. Internal planning documents from failing grid authority, cost comparison models, deferred liability assumptions, notes tied to Astorvale, and at least 4 other mixed housing projects. Adrian scanned the header, and his eyebrows lifted just enough to matter. Can you authenticate it? I already cross-checked signatures against the project chain. Elias joined them a minute later with updated symptom data from the worker groups Jonas had gathered. The pattern was deepening: bad sleep, headaches, airway irritation, slower concentration, and faster improvement after removal from the live profile than normal stress alone could explain. Adrian looked from one file to the other and rebuilt the case in his head. Tomorrow we stop defending you as merely the least wrong person in a bad emergency. Tomorrow we make them defend their standard. That was the first time Tessa felt the chamber might crack. The second session opened with more confidence from the council side than the evidence deserved. That told Tessa they still believed process would protect them. People inside large systems often mistook procedure for insulation. Adrian began differently. He did not start with Tessa at all. He called Dr. Elias Reese. Elias was not charismatic, which helped. He was precise. He walked the chamber through the human consequences of the final Astorvale profile in language ordinary people could follow. No sensationalism, no apocalypse, only what it meant to live and work under a habitat standard that pulled performance out of a body while stealing its recovery. A council assessor asked, would every human resident experience the same decline? No. Then the profile cannot be described as uniformly unsafe. Elias did not flinch. If only universally lethal conditions are called unsafe, then your definition protects systems, not people. That line moved through the chamber like a low current. Then Adrian called Jonas Pike. The room had clearly expected a hostile labor witness. What got was worse for them. Jonas told the chamber he had cursed Tessa the night the towers fell. He described crowded transit corridors, missed work, crying children, and men angry enough to hit walls because there was nowhere else to put the feeling. Then he described the worker reports that started matching too neatly to ignore. I did not come here because I like what she did, he said. I came because I know when someone with power counts on working people to swallow damage quietly. That is what this smells like. Not emergency. Policy. Leora's son tried to soften him. Mr. Pike, is it fair to say your members remain under severe emotional and economic strain due to the delay? Yes. And might such strain influence how your workers interpret symptoms? Jonas gave her a look built in freight yards and contract fights. Lady, if your point is that exhausted people are easier to convince their pain is normal, I agree. Somewhere in the observer tier, someone laughed before choking it down. By midday, the case had shifted. It was no longer just about one woman's unauthorized act. Now it was about a city's hidden biology. That still was not enough, because the council side could still retreat into the language of necessary compromise. Then Mina's documents came in. Adrian introduced them carefully, not as stolen leaks, but as newly obtained planning records tied to certification decisions relevant to Astorvale. Sarek Don objected at once. Leora joined him, and Marental allowed limited review. The first table showed 3 engineering paths. Path A required broader modular adaptation, more energy use, and species-specific recovery tuning in the human labor sectors. It cost the most. Path B required partial adaptation and moderate infrastructure strain. It cost less. Path C, the chosen path, held human sectors at the outer edge of legal tolerance while protecting equipment efficiency and dominant block comfort. It cost the least. Beside each path sat projected exposure. Not moral harm, not human suffering. Exposure. Path C assumed increased chronic respiratory claims, neurofatigue management costs, and worker loss among human occupants. The notes did not treat those outcomes as accidents. They treated them as manageable cost. The room went very quiet. Adrian let the silence stand before speaking. To be clear, these records do not show that human harm was unforeseeable. They show it was forecast, compared, and selected as part of a cost structure. Sarek Don stood, cold for the first time. Cost modeling does not prove intent to harm. Adrian nodded. Correct. It proves knowledge of harm. In infrastructure law, selected knowledge under price pressure is often more revealing. Leora tried another route. Any multi-species standard produces variable outcomes. This document reflects the simple reality that no design can eliminate all unequal burden. Tessa asked permission to speak, and after a beat, Marental gave it. Tessa rose and turned, not to the adjudicators, but to the projection. This is where language is doing the crime for you. No one interrupted. You call it unequal burden. You call humanity high resilience. You call long-term decline manageable. You call lost recovery acceptable. You call habitat harm worker drift instead of city-caused injury. Every word is shaped to make one fact sound natural. She looked straight at the chamber. The fact is simple. Astorvale was made cheaper by deciding human bodies could absorb more damage than other bodies. Not because we agreed, because we could be made to carry it. Now the chamber moved with real discomfort. Halden Vey tried to recover ground. Engineer Ward wants to criminalize compromise itself. If her logic stands, every shared city becomes impossible. Tessa turned toward him at last. No, my logic says a shared city stops being shared when one group's pain becomes the margin that pays for everyone else's efficiency. That reached farther than the technical evidence had. Not because it was poetic, but because it translated the whole conflict into something ordinary people could hear. The council did what institutions do when cornered. It fled to process. Adrian knew it too. In the recess room, he paced once across the floor, then looked at Tessa. They are preparing to split the verdict. Meaning, they may accept the standard was morally compromised and still brand your action unlawful enough to scare everyone who comes after you. Mina was furious. So they keep the system and bury the person who exposed it. Better, Adrian said. They adjust the system slightly and bury the person harder. Then they look enlightened. Tessa sat very still. It was not applause she needed. She had known for days that applause was not part of this story. But if they cut her down without truly changing the structure, then Astorvale would become a lesson in obedience. Humanity would be told that even when the system priced its own damage in writing, the only proper answer was petition and patience. No, she said. Adrian stopped pacing. Do you have something? Tessa looked at Elias. How stable is the chamber's simulation suite? He blinked. The physiological demonstration bays. Yes. Mina's face changed first. Tessa. Adrian spoke slowly. Explain. Their case still depends on distance, Tessa said. All their language keeps the harm abstract. Limits tolerance bands, resilience. They can survive this if they never have to feel the standard as a body instead of a document. Elias exhaled. You want to run the profile on them? Not on all of them. On volunteers if the chamber requires it. But yes. Adrian stared at her as if weighing both brilliance and catastrophe. You understand how that looks. It looks like evidence. It also looks like theater. Only if the system is not real. Silence sat there for a moment. Then Mina said, we can build the profile exactly from the approved Astroveil tables. No embellishment. No exaggeration. Elias was already working through the medical limits. Short exposure, monitored, reversible. Enough to show acute effects without lasting harm. Adrian rubbed one hand across his mouth. The chamber will resist. They will resist more if they know what it will show, Tessa said. By the time the session resumed, Adrian had turned the idea into a procedural petition. He requested a direct, demonstrative review in the chamber simulation bays, arguing that the council side had repeatedly minimized the lived effect of the approved Astroveil profile. If they wish to call it merely uncomfortable instead of harmful, the chamber should observe its acute effect under controlled conditions using its own oversight staff. The objection came instantly. Sarek Dawn called it manipulative spectacle. Leora Sun called it medically uninformative. Halden Vey called it an attempt to embarrass the council rather than clarify the law. Adrian did not deny the possibility of embarrassment. The council is not entitled to remain comfortable while deciding what discomfort counts as acceptable for others. That landed hard enough that Marintal recessed the chamber rather than rule too quickly. Jonas came to stand a short distance away. I did not think they would listen this far. They have not decided anything. No, but they look like they heard. Tessa let that sit. After a while he said, my boys used to ask how systems get so big no one inside them feels guilty. She turned toward him. What did you tell them? That guild is expensive. So powerful people turn it into vocabulary. She almost smiled. He glanced at her. You still may lose. Yes. If you do, the workers will remember who forced the room to say the quiet part out loud. That is not enough. No, Jonas said. But it is not nothing. When the chamber reconvened, Marintal allowed the demonstration. Not because she was bold, but because denying it now would have looked like fear. The simulation suite lay beside the chamber proper, designed for infrastructure modeling, environmental stress tests, and policy review. It was rarely used for live human demonstration because those in power preferred charts to embodiment. The irony suited Tessa. The approved Astroveil profile was loaded exactly as signed. Council technicians confirmed the values. Elias confirmed the medical safeguards, and participation was limited. Marintal refused, which Tessa had expected. But one infrastructure assessor agreed. So did Sarek Dawn, after a visible calculation that refusing would look worse. Leora Sun hesitated longest, then stepped in with the face of a woman who trusted doctrine more than sensation. 2 volunteer oversight staff joined them to broaden the sample. Tessa watched through the glass with Jonas, Mina, Adrian, Elias, and the rest of the chamber. At first, nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. The profile was not built to cause spectacle. It was built to hide inside endurance. The volunteers stood in the environment bay while the approved pressure, moisture, oxygen rebound, and vibration pattern phased into place. They were asked to do simple tasks at intervals. Speak a sequence, track a moving marker, complete a basic hand assembly, and report what they felt. At minute 3, one oversight officer blinked too much and asked for water. At minute 5, Sarek Dawn missed a marker on the board and frowned at it, as though the board were wrong. At minute 7, Leora lifted a hand to her sternum, a small unconscious move from someone trying to open a breath. At minute 8, the infrastructure assessor asked for a repeat on the verbal sequence. By minute 10, The pattern could not be denied. Slower responses, eye irritation, headache pressure, shallow inhalation, rising frustration, and a decline in fine motor control under what the sign standards still classified as acceptable for extended human occupancy. No one was in mortal danger. That was the whole point. Elias narrated quietly as the data came in. Observe the drop in response consistency. Note the breathing compensation. Note the onset of hand tremor in participant 3. Note how fast the change appears. Now imagine work shifts, family living cycles, and children sleeping in the same environment day after day. Leora tried to continue the sequence, then stopped and braced one hand on the table. When the cycle ended, no one in the observation room spoke at first. The participants emerged more offended than injured, and in some ways that made the result stronger. Their bodies had not been attacked. They had simply been asked to live for a few minutes inside the standard they had defended for humans as tolerable. Adrian did not move. Tessa did. With permission from Marintal, she stepped into the stillness before the room could rebuild its protective language. No one in that bay died, she said. No one even came close. That is the shield you have been hiding behind this whole time. You built a standard whose cruelty lives below your threshold for alarm and above ours for a decent life. Then you told yourselves that because people could keep working, the harm belonged to them instead of the city. She turned toward the adjudicator arc. Astervale was not an accident. It was a choice made plain by accounting and disguised by standards. The only reason this chamber is shocked is that for 10 minutes, the people who signed the language had to inhabit it. Leorisen's face had gone pale under the chamber lights. She was still recovering enough to sound angry rather than shaken. This proves acute discomfort under a compressed setting, she said. It does not justify unilateral destruction of shared infrastructure. Tessa held her gaze. No, it only proves that the shared infrastructure was never truly shared. That should have been enough. It was not, because systems did not surrender all at once. They broke by segments. When Marintal returned, the decision came in layers. The first layer was condemnation. The collapse of the towers was ruled an unlawful act taken outside recognized authority. Tessa felt the words hit the room like cold iron and did not move. The second layer followed before the first could fully settle. The chamber further found that the approved Astervale environmental profile had been certified under materially misleading characterization of long-term human biological harm. It ordered immediate suspension of occupancy under that profile and a full audit of the certification chain linking council standards offices, Astervale administration, and associated consortium design records. Murmurs rolled through the tiers. Halden Vey had gone still. Sarek Dawn looked openly sick. Leorisen's hands were clasped so tightly that the joints had whitened. Marintal kept reading. The chamber found that existing compatibility law did not adequately protect non-dominant species from slow, cumulative harm hidden inside legal infrastructure bans. Pending reform, no future multi-species civic or labor habitat containing substantial human occupancy would enter operation without independent biological certification from an Earth-authorized review body. Not comment. Certification. Independent. Earth-authorized. The room changed in that moment. Not with cheers. With realization. Marintal named the provisional measure the Ward biological veto in recognition of the legal precedent established by the case. Tessa almost flinched at hearing her own name welded to doctrine, but there it was. The law had been forced to remember the body. It had discounted. The final layers were harsher and quieter. Failing grid authority was placed under mandatory interblock review. The insurance board exposure assumptions would be reopened. Astervale administration would face secondary inquiry for disclosure failures. There would be no full exoneration for Tessa. There would also be no clean burial. When the session closed, no one celebrated. That felt right. Jonas found her first outside the chamber. You won. Tessa looked back through the closing doors. Not cleanly. Clean is for people who did not have to force the thing. Mina came next, eyes bright more from fatigue than joy. Ward biological veto. You hate it already. I hate the name. You may be alone there. Elias clasped Tessa's forearm once. It was the closest thing to ceremony he knew. The children in District 9 will breathe better than this law would have allowed yesterday, he said. That is enough for one lifetime. Adrian waited until the others had stepped back. They will still come after your license. I assumed. They may suspend you for a period. They may never give you a project this public again. Tessa was surprised by how little that hurt compared to everything else. And Earth. Earth will embrace the precedent and carefully study the inconvenience of embracing the person. She laughed once, without humor. That sounds like us. It sounds like everyone. In the days that followed, Astorvale remained closed while the audit spread. The city was not abandoned. It was rewritten. Human housing bans were stripped down and redesigned under Earth review. The first families moved in months later instead of days later, and that delay hurt. Tessa never let herself romanticize it. Temporary corridors stayed crowded too long. Work contracts remained unstable, and some people would never forgive her for the extra months of uncertainty. But when the rewritten city opened, it opened under different air. A month after the ruling, Tessa returned to Astorvale under limited authority to inspect the redesigned District 9 profile. No crowds waited for her that time, and no cameras either. The station had moved on to other emergencies, and she preferred it that way. She walked the housing ring with a small Earth technical team. The air sat differently in her lungs. Moisture recovery had been restored, oxygen rebound deepened after labor cycles, particulate scrub intervals tightened, and floor vibration damping corrected. None of it looked dramatic. Safety rarely did. It lived in the small things people never had to think about once they trusted a room to hold them. In the central court, she paused by the same bench where, on opening eve, she had seen a child asleep under station light while everyone else admired the towers. A little boy sat there now with a school packet on his knees, arguing with his father over a loose boot. They looked ordinary. That was the whole point. Jonas Pike met her near intake. They wanted a public thank you during opening week. What did you tell them? That if they wanted gratitude, they should have built the place right the first time. Tessa nodded. Reasonable. He looked over the district. Some people still say you had no right. They are not wrong, she said. I had no lawful authority to do what I did. I made the choice anyway because every lawful door was built to open after the harm had already begun. Jonas studied her, then gave a short grunt that might have been agreement. You still talk like a builder. What else would I talk like? He almost smiled. Someone the galaxy keeps calling dangerous. They should, Tessa said. Systems like that deserve to fear the wrong engineer. The next morning, Earth Reconstruction Command sent formal notice that her license review remained open. Suspension was deferred while Earth helped build the new certification framework that now carried her name whether she liked it or not. She read the notice once, folded it, and slipped it into her jacket. From the upper walk, she looked at the replacement towers. They were shorter, less elegant, and more expensive than the first three. To her, they were beautiful. The galaxy had not become fair. Committees would go back to bargaining over language. Consortia would hunt for new loopholes, and power would keep trying to rename the pain it found convenient. But on Orion Gate, in one city that had almost opened as a polished lie, humanity had forced the record to change. Tessa placed one hand on the rail and drew in a full breath. It came easy. For now, that was enough. If this story stayed with you, it may be because it was never only about one city, one engineer, or one broken system. It was about the moment someone finally refused to call slow suffering acceptable. It was about the price of telling the truth when the whole machine is built to bury it. And it was about something the galaxy keeps learning the hard way. Humanity does not break quietly. Tessa Ward did not fight for applause. She fought so no one would ever again be forced to live inside a lie that had been stamped legal, efficient, and necessary. Maybe that is what makes courage so dangerous to a system like this. Not noise, not rage, but one person who sees clearly, stands firm, and refuses to move. If this story meant something to you, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who loves powerful science fiction, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where humanity is pushed to the edge and answers back. Your support truly helps this channel grow, and it helps us keep bringing you bigger, stronger, deeper stories like this one. Thank you for being here. And until the next story, stay strong, stay curious, and never let anyone convince you that your pain is just the cost of keeping their world running.